In this week's video, I want to talk to you about some of the reasons why I believe what we are witnessing at the moment could potentially be a lot worse for the housing market than what happened during the global financial crisis in 2007, 8 and 9. Now, I've seen news articles about this a number of times over the past few months, with people comparing what is happening now to what happened in 2008, and them also using that as a yardstick, saying, well, house prices are unlikely to fall as much as that because things have changed. We have things like the mortgage stress test in place over the past decade or so to protect lenders and borrowers. So in theory, things should never be as bad again as they were back in 2008. Now, I think that is a short-sighted way to think about things because there are so many other factors at the moment that have an overriding power to just a simple mortgage stress test. So in this video, I'm going to be talking you through a number of different elements which I think combine to actually make things much worse now than they were back in 2008. And potentially that could mean a greater negative impact on the housing market than what happened during the global financial crisis. So just before I get into my points, I just want to quickly cover the core of most people's arguments when they refer back to 2008 and why things won't be as bad, and that is the mortgage stress test. So I've highlighted a few things I'm just going to read very, very briefly. After the 2008 credit crunch, governments all over the world were left supporting insolvent or near insolvent banks that had seen their balance sheets crumble overnight. And we all remember the banks being bailed out. And the reason for this was determined to be irresponsible lending to people on low interest rates. So basically the banks were lending to people they should not have been lending to. In the UK, pre-2008, it was normal for borrowers to borrow 100% of the purchase price of their new home, sometimes even more than 100%, with extra money being lent for consumer goods, cars, holidays, based on the expectation that housing market would keep rising in value. And I remember this. I remember seeing mortgages in excess of 100%, 110, 120%. So it's no wonder we got ourselves in a world of trouble back then. So post-2008, the UK government laid down new regulations requiring mortgage lenders to adhere to a variety of policies relating to the lending practices, probably the most important of which was the mortgage stress test. I'm going to scroll down a bit further so you guys can see. Lenders are required to stress test mortgages at 3% above the rate at which fixed or capped rate loans will revert, or 3% above the lender's SVR, the standard variable rate. So this stress test is supposed to protect the borrower and the lender, and in theory prevent a repeat of 2008. And in isolation, this is a good thing. Hopefully people that do own homes at the moment that are mortgaged are in a much better place than people would have been in 2008, as they would have been stress tested to ensure they have some capacity in their overall budget to afford mortgages going up. But this on its own is not enough to prevent what is happening. I don't think this individual single policy is going to prevent the big downturn that I believe has already started. We're already seeing in the monthly figures. We're 4 or 5 months into it, and this is likely to continue. So the first reason why what we're seeing at the moment is nothing like 2008, and that is interest rates. So I'm sure you guys will remember, especially those of you that had bought a house around that time or owned a house around that time in 2008. Interest rates were quite high in 2007. I bought my very first house in 2007, and I think our interest rate was about 6.5%. And then all of a sudden, the global financial crisis kicked off. We had the credit crunch, and the Bank of England started slashing interest rates to try and save the housing market and the economy. And you can see they slashed them from pretty much close to 6% down to 0.5% within, well, it's about 18 months that they did this. So this was a huge drop to try to stimulate the economy and to stimulate the housing market. Now, if you compare that to what they're doing at the moment, they are doing the complete opposite. So there's no way you can compare what we're doing at the moment in 2023 to what happened in 2008 as the biggest single tool in the Bank of England's toolbox is going in the opposite direction. They cannot cut interest rates at the moment. They are hiking interest rates. So this is the first reason, and this alone, in my eyes, is powerful enough to pretty much kick out any arguments about it being comparable to 2008, because they cannot do the most powerful thing that they did in 2008. We're going in the complete opposite direction. And the reason for this, as I'm sure you guys are all aware, we have crazy high inflation, despite the fact I'm sure you've read lots of positive articles about inflation over the past month or so, saying that inflation has peaked and it's going to be coming down throughout the year. Yes, that is likely to be the case. Inflation probably has peaked and it's going to come down, but it's still inflation on top of inflation that's already happened. So inflation coming down this year doesn't mean prices are coming down. If inflation comes down to 5%, that's 5% on top of the 10% we've already had. And if you look at RPI figures instead of CPI, that's more like a 15% increase we've already had, not a 10% increase we've already had. And if you compare this back to 2008, at the very peak there, it was 5%. Now we've been at above 5% since, December 21. So for over a year, our inflation has been above what was happening at the very peak for a very short period of time during the global financial crisis. So inflation is a big problem. And this has a knock-on effect to the housing market because back in 2008, we didn't have huge problems with inflation. So what the government could do was quantitative easing. So their first tool was the interest rates that they cut. And the second one, they introduced money printing, basically. So you can see here during the global financial crisis, they basically printed 200 billion to save the economy and the housing market. Now at the moment, they are supposed to be doing quantitative tightening. And if you scroll down here, I think that actually started in December. Let me just find the relevant line. There we go there. So I'll blow that up a little bit bigger so you guys can see. And at the start of November, this is in 2022, it became the first central bank among the G7 group of advanced economies to start actively selling bonds to investors. So quantitative tightening has started. So we've turned off the money printers here in the UK. So the two biggest tools that helped save the housing market last time or help the fall to slow down and not be as big as it could have been, interest rates going to pretty much zero and massive quantitative easing, they can't do either of those. So those two reasons are not comparable to 2008 because, again, they're the complete opposite of what happened back then. The next thing we have is national debt. I'll make this a bit bigger for you guys as well. So back in 2007 and 8 and 9, our national debt was fairly manageable, somewhere just above 30 to 35%. And then the quantitative easing kicked in, of course, along with all of the government debt. And look, our national debt soared. And again here, another spike after COVID. And if we go back to that BBC article, we can see here there was another big pump here after COVID. So national debt is we're approaching unsustainable levels. The amount of money that the government is paying in interest payments means we're having to borrow money every month just to pay our existing debt. It's kind of crazy, the position we're in. But it just means that the government, even the government, so the Bank of England can't do anything. They can't reduce interest rates and they can't do more money printing. And the government can't go and borrow a load of money either, because as we found when Liz Truss tried that with the mini budgets, the markets are saying, no. If you try and borrow too much money, the markets are not going to like that and things are going to be even worse. So the Bank of England have their hands tied behind their back and the government can't do very much either. So one of the things that the government did last time was a stamp duty cut. And to be fair, they have done one this time. They did this in September, although it kind of went under the radar with all the other noise that was going on. So I think back in 2008, they cut stamp duty to, I think it's for first-time buyers up to £175,000. Whereas at the moment, first-time buyers can now buy up to £425,000 and not pay any stamp duty. So you could say we almost have equivalent support from the government on that issue, both then and now. So that is reasonably comparable to 2008. But this is already in place back in September and house prices are falling. So I don't think it's going to have much of an impact. The other thing to keep in mind is back in 2008, when house prices were falling, the number of buy-to-let households was growing. So there were investors effectively buying the dip. They were coming along and snapping up these properties. So that would have limited the downside of the housing market. Now, what is happening at the moment, and as I've covered in a previous video, we're at the start of a buy-to-let exodus where it's just not profitable for many people to be buy-to-let landlords. So buy-to-let landlords are selling up, and the number of private rented households now has been in decline for the past couple of years due to regulation and tax changes, and also with the falling house prices now encouraging people to exit as quickly as possible. So without the buy-to-let investors buying the dip, so to speak, there's going to be a lot less support during the crash itself, whereas you can see here, these were still being snapped up during 2007, 8 and 9. That's not going to be the case this time around. We also have Help to Buy applications, so that ended back in March, and the final equity loans will be issued by the end of March 2023. So there's no government support for new builds either. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this yourself on Rightmove, but I'm seeing more and more new properties listed on there that are actually built. Only a year or two ago, if you went to a new build estate and you tried to buy a house, they'd be like, yeah, you need to exchange within 28 days, and then you need to go and find yourself a rental property for 6 months or 12 months until we actually build the thing. Now these things are built, they're on Rightmove, and they still can't sell them. And without the government support, they're going to really struggle to sell these new builds. And I think actually the new builds are the ones that are being a bit more realistic about cutting their prices quickly, because they know they need to shift these assets sharpish. And finally, just to go back to the inflation argument, they're saying that inflation is coming down, but don't forget, energy prices are about to go up 40% in April. So for any of you guys wondering how I've got that figure, the energy price guarantee from the government is currently £2,500. So regardless of what the Ofgem price cap is, which I think today has been reduced to like 3,200, the energy price guarantee is increasing from 2,500 to 3,000. And I'm sure those of you that are fairly sharp on maths will be going, well, that's not 40%. Well, let me show you actually what is happening. So at the moment, we have a £2,500 energy price guarantee. But every household in the UK over this winter received £400. You've probably seen it yourself, £67 monthly payments for 6 months. So basically, the average energy bill, remember some people are going to be paying more and less than this, is not a cap. It's only the cap on the unit cost, not your actual bill. The average cost has been £2,100. So we're not going to get that £400 next year. So that's going to go from £2,100 to £3,000. So that's a £900 difference. So if we do £900, divide that by the original total, times that by 100, you've got a 42.8% increase in your energy bills. So when they tell you inflation is coming down, that doesn't mean people aren't getting poorer. So they're not going to be able to afford to buy houses. Also, on top of this, you've got council tax going up at 5% in 75% of places. And you're probably seeing it yourself with your mobile phone and your broadband providers that they have hiked their prices around about 14%, some as high as 17%. So when you combine all of these factors, I think these really outweigh a mortgage stress test. And also, even if people can afford the higher mortgages, which is what the stress test is designed to do, someone can see their mortgage payments go up a few percent and still afford the mortgage repayment. But those people may not be able to remortgage onto a new fixed rate. So they're basically going to be left with two options. Either go onto the lender's standard variable rate, which is about 7% for most lenders at the moment. So that's going to destroy their exposable income even more. Or they might want to consider selling the house, which will contribute to supply, which will go on to have some downward pressure on house prices. So overall, what is happening now, in my opinion, is in no way comparable to 2008. And it is impossible to predict exactly how this is going to play out, as we're in an economic world that we have never seen before. I think it's going to be bad. I've covered it in previous videos, but we will see how things play out over the next year or two. So those are my thoughts on the housing market at the moment compared to 2008. If you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate if you scroll down and hit the like button. If you want to see more from me, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to chat to me, head over to Twitter. I'm going to post a link in the pinned top comment. And what I'm going to do now is pop up a video talking you guys through what I believe the buy-to-let exodus is going to put extreme downward pressure on the housing market. And I'll see you guys over there.